gentlemen, may I have your attention, please? The show starts in 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Invest in Yourself, the podcast series. I am, of course, the podcast mogul, Phil Better, and today I am pleased to have the host and creator of the Icarus Complex, Linden Cole. Linden, thank you so much for being a guest on the show.
Thank you for having me. Thank you, Phil. How's it going?
I'm doing very well. Linden, you're the first podcaster that we have who's created a story type podcast on the show. Most of our guests are interview podcasters or news people, but this is the first time I've had someone who's created a fictional podcast, a fictional world that deals in reality a bit, because it deals with the struggles that people have.
Correct.
Or in the everyday world. So, Linden, before we jump into everything about the podcast, how about you introduce yourself to my audience?
Hi, my name is Linden Cole. I am 35, obviously based in London. I work in IT. So I used to be a creative, used to work in acting before in behind the scenes, but obviously now I'm working in IT. So that's basically my premise.
Awesome. And when did you start podcasting? Like, was this just something you're like, I'm going to do this over like the COVID situation, or did you have other projects that you did beforehand?
Yeah, so I had a podcast with a friend of mine about 5 years ago. I must admit it wasn't very good. So we only probably lasted about 6 episodes, and it was down to just consistency and content. It wasn't very it wasn't good in my opinion. So we kind of just put that aside. And I'd actually written this, or the basis of this, my new podcast anyway. I wrote it about 7 years ago to turn into a book. And it was the idea of getting it published, but obviously things kind of got in the way, so it didn't really happen. And then obviously COVID happened, and I decided to turn it into an audio book, but a podcast kind of came out of it. So here we are.
Excellent. And how did you come up with the idea of the Icarus Complex? Because it's, I'm just going to read the quick description so my audience knows what it's about. Ever wonder what goes through the mind of some men and why we sometimes do the things we do? Described as Adrian Mole meets Bridget Jones, the Icarus Complex is a love's sorry and goodbye letter to the ones or those who got away, but equally a coming of age, candid, reflective, humorous, but undoubtedly honest, heartbreaking, and never before told account about the pitfalls of relationships and pride and navigating life growing up as a Black man and its stigmas, as well as bringing to light what can happen when even the most once innocent and carefree person decides to bite off more than they can chew, and the devastating consequences thereafter. Now, if that's not going to hook someone, I don't know what will.
It's quite a mouthful there.
Yeah, it took a bit to go through.
So you asked about what made me do this. I think I'll actually be honest with you. I was on a train once going to work, and I saw a lady reading a magazine. It was about 10 things that your man wants, and it's obviously written by a woman. So I thought, well, what better way for someone to know what a man wants than actually write from the perspective of a man. So I decided to write a book just based on some of the pitfalls that we go through as men. Not all men, I'd say some men. Obviously, we're very renowned for not dealing with our emotions very well. So yeah, it's more of an adolescence book as to navigating throughout life, dealing with relationships, whether it be with partners or friends. And yeah, that was basically it. Obviously, there are some parts of it that do have some elements of personal to it, as most writing does. But yeah, it was a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun trying to navigate and trying to obviously make sure that I don't make this particular person sound too chauvinistic, but also make them sound as if it's supposed to be a how not to guide, but also a somewhat good story of redemption in some way. But we'll see.
Oh, I love it. So you started this, it says here, you got 28 episodes going in. Each one is a chapter. You have the recaps as well. They they're about between an hour to an hour and a half, I'm showing here. Did you purposely choose that you wanted to do an hour, or was that just happened how the recording just came out per chapter?
Yeah, so that's actually how long it takes. That's actually how long the chapter is in terms of narration. So obviously, I do all of the narration side of it. Initially, I was doing all of the voices as well for the first two chapters, but as you can tell, my female voice isn't the greatest.
No, no, you got a very deep masculine voice, so it could be a little difficult doing those female
Yeah, so
voices.
I was doing them at first, and I was changing the pitch, but I realized if I really wanted to make this sound good, I had to try and obviously and get some actors to do this. So I auditioned some voice actors for this. Some of the chapters are a bit smaller, so they might be half an hour long. But obviously, as it gets towards into the middle of the book, then they last about an hour. Some maybe I've split down to two parts today, rather than being a full hour and a half. It's about 45 minutes.
Okay. And why did you choose, like you mentioned before that you were looking to turn it into an audio book. What made you decide, hey, we're going to make this into a podcast instead? Like, what was the thinking behind that?
Um, the creativity, having the creative license to do what I wanted to do with it. I think if I made it into an audio book, I'd probably be, or in my opinion, at the time, I'd have my hands tied behind my back as to what I can and can't do in terms of licenses and stuff like that. So, um, obviously, I've done that anyway. I have to obviously purchase licenses for music and sound effects within the actual podcast. But with an audio book, I feel like you've got a certain amount of time to get it done. Where this allows me to have breaks in between, because it can be quite draining to put this out sometimes. Obviously, there's about 50 or so chapters, and it's still not quite finished yet. So if I turned it into an audio book, I feel like I would have a certain amount of time just to get it finished by. Where if I can use a podcast, it gives me a lot more time to and a lot more freedom to do as I please with it.
Excellent. And so you you're still writing this book? It's still an ongoing project? Is it completed?
I would say it is 99% completed. There is just a little bit of the ending to finish off, but that will be a little while yet before we get to that part. But yeah, I have an idea of my ending. It's just I need to physically put down the last few bits into physical form so I can read it.
I love that. And how did you go about finding the audience that was looking for this type of story?
It's a good question. That I think it's weird because I was kind of hoping for my target audience to be women, and it was more just than like I obviously again when best way I can describe this when 50 Shades came out, obviously I did see a lot of women obviously reading that on the trains and obviously audiobooks on that. And I just expect women to read more in order to have an idea of wanting to know what goes through men's minds. But I found that my target audience now has completely changed. I've found I've got more men listening to this than the actual women, which is actually quite a surprise, given that obviously some men's span of attention isn't the longest. Um, so yeah, I didn't expect it to be I didn't expect it to be doing as well as it has done. But yeah, I've also found that sometimes the women who listen to it aren't particularly proud of the character, which I kind of expected. Although sometimes the men do feel like they're rooting for somebody as well. So it's hard to say sometimes about dynamics of an audience.
Oh, and so you when you started this podcast, did you have an idea of where you wanted to go with it? Like, did you have an idea of your growth that you wanted, or you just wanted to tell the story of the characters?
I'll be completely honest. Initially, when I did this, it was more just to pass the time. Um,
Fair
obviously,
enough.
yeah, being in lockdown, like I said, I didn't expect it wasn't done with any means of trying to get my story out there so everybody heard it. It was because we're stuck at home, and obviously I was working at the time. I needed an outlet. Obviously, being an ex-creative, so I just kind of thought, well, at least let me try and stab my hand at doing the podcast and see how well it does. But obviously, now that it's doing what it's doing, I need to be a bit more conscious as to my end goal, because um, it takes a lot of time to create. Obviously, there are a lot of discussions about where I go next with it and stuff like that, which I never ever considered before. It was more just a hobby rather than what it's now become it's become a hobby, but also something that I need to invest in properly with my time. So
Oh, I love that. I love that how you started it was just like, hey, I have my book, I want to get it out, and now
yeah,
you're seeing the growth of it
correct.
and the love that your podcast and your story has shown. Will there be maybe I know you're going through seasons, but is there going to be a second book maybe that could come out of this?
Uh, in discussions of doing that at the moment. I don't know whether my creative side, because it's taken 7 years to write this, so I don't
Yeah.
really know where I can leave a big gap of writing this. The next one, there are ideas, there are plans or things. I don't think it will be necessarily related to this particular character. It may well be something else. I don't really want to give the plot away as such, but yeah, I have an idea. But I just don't know how to get there yet. So we'll
Oh,
see.
well. Hey, as creatives, we know where we want to go. We just blaze our own trail. So
Correct.
obviously,
Yeah.
something amazing is going to come out, and I'm pretty sure people are going to really love this. Um, I want to know when you're sitting down to record for this, because I've never done what I would consider, I guess, an audio drama, because
Mhm.
it's similar to what the BBC had the World of the World, a War of World, many years ago, and this is somewhat similar to it because it is playing over a certain amount of time, and
Sure.
it's telling a story. So, what is it like? Like, I'm completely baffled by people who are able to create this world and be able to share it with an audience. Like, were you nervous when you started producing this podcast?
Um, yes, initially I was, and I think this is probably the best medium for it. As much as I wanted to put it out as a book originally, I feel like the immersive side of it, the music and the sound and the character voices just gives it an extra edge. I don't think it really works very well in print. So I kind of feel like initially, like I said, I didn't have any idea about the sound effects. It wasn't until I listened back to the first chapter when I recorded it that I realized that it needed something more, which is why I started to add additional parts to it. So without the music, without the sound effects, I don't think it would be at all listenable. I'll be honest with you.
No,
I could I could
it's true.
I could be honest
Um,
about that.
let's go into the production of this, because it's obviously it takes you time because you have to get the actors and the actresses to do
Sure.
the voices, and then you have to add. Are you editing the whole thing yourself?
I am indeed. I am indeed.
Oh,
So yeah, so it takes about roughly a week to do per chapter. Now
wow.
what I have done now is I'm trying to be a bit more forward thinking. So I used to audition the actors and actresses a week in advance, but sometimes people's timetables don't necessarily work when yours does. So I had to think ahead. So I would say that if I'm doing season three, which I'm currently on at the moment, I've just auditioned everybody for that season already, and I've already got their stuff down, recorded, so that when I'm ready to get to that particular chapter, I can just edit their parts in. But yeah, even so, it takes me about a week, 2 or 3 days to record the actual narration side of it, and also and obviously the lines that I do. Then editing in takes about another day or so, and then about another day or so after that of listening back to it to making the alterations. So yeah, we're about a week per.
And how did you go about getting the sound effects, the musical rights? And I noticed that you also have playlists on Spotify for
Yeah,
the
yes,
show.
yes.
That is something new that I haven't seen before. What made you get that idea? So let's go back to the first half of the question, which is, where did you get the licenses and the sound effects for your podcast?
So licenses for music, for sound effects, sorry, came from a website called Epidemic Sound, which is quite ironic given obviously what we were going through at the time when I started it. It's a really good, really, really strange name to use. But yeah, I obviously I pay for that, and I use that for my sounds, and for the music. There was I spoke to a few people in the industry that I just knew from growing up, and the only way around I'm getting with the music is using karaoke songs rather than using actual backing tracks. Um, I'm allowed to use the karaoke songs or some. I obviously pay the license for that as well, but all of the music in there isn't necessarily music that I can obviously be charged for copyright for, because obviously can't really afford that. So um,
No,
yeah,
asking Madonna to,
yeah,
can I use the rights to your song?
yeah,
Could end up costing you a few thousand.
exactly. So yeah, so it's yeah, two licenses, one for karaoke songs and another for sound effects. And that's really it. And obviously then hosting for the podcast on Buzzsprout, which is where I host my podcast episodes.
So I'm curious, because your story obviously takes place in, I'm guessing, London, correct?
It starts off in London and then moves around the UK.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you notice when you're looking at your stats and that you have a hardcore base in the UK, or is it more of an international feel that you're getting from?
The UK is mainly the base, and I don't know whether that's down to, like, I know I speak a certain way, so I'm wondering whether certain, and I've written it a certain way as well, not with the intention of having an international audience necessarily listen to it or look to it, and that wasn't intentional. That was just how I wrote it at the time. So certain phrases may not necessarily be familiar to somebody from Canada, for example, or America. So I am conscious of that. However, yes, most of my listeners are in the UK, but again, it's mainly, I've got obviously quite a few in America, and strangely enough, in South Africa and Nigeria, which is, I didn't expect that at all. So yeah, so it's quite it definitely is quite a mixed bag of listeners globally. Yes.
No, and I fully understand when you start your podcast and then you start seeing the random countries in the world listening to it.
Mhm.
It is somewhat strange, and you're like, wow, people are actually listening to me.
But also very
Um,
humbling as well. Yeah.
Oh, hugely humbling. Like when I get a review or something on my podcast, it's like, oh my god, someone actually listened to it. Because that's the fear I find with podcasters. When you put something out, will people listen?
Correct.
Now, for your promotion of this, how do you go about promoting a fictional a story podcast?
I feel like I'm selling myself short here. Not very well. Not very well, Phil, because like I said again, because it was never an intention in the first place to do what I was how it is at the moment. So I kind of feel like I started off late with the promo side of it. I probably should have at least tried to build some sort of fan base first and then obviously release them. But these things work out in the way they do. Promo is difficult to do because social media is quite a minefield, and there's so many tricks and stuff that people do that I'm just so blown away by it now that I can't always keep up. So all I really do is when I know that I'm releasing an episode, I'll just drop a post to say that it's released on that day. In between seasons, I'll try and pick up some buzz in between seasons, which also started the idea about the playlist. Excuse me. Obviously, the playlist was a every song that had been played in a particular season. Obviously, I then just created a playlist for that just to give anybody who wanted to know what the songs were in each episode or in each season an idea of where they came from. Engagement is also as much part of it as well. Obviously, it's very good to and like I said, I'm always humbled by whenever someone listens. So anybody that takes the time to review or to send a comment, good or bad, I'll always send a message back just to say thank you for your time and stuff like that. So yeah, it's promo's hard, but once you get it right, it kind of just flows like an ocean, as they say.
Yeah. So I do want to know, like, because you started a fictional based podcast that's not based, well, not a regular that we hear most of the time. Well, for me, I'm normally hearing interview based podcasts and not story based podcast. What advice would you have for someone who is decided to, go down that route, maybe produce a audio drama for podcasting?
Um, for an audio drama, I would say first bit of advice is consistency. Um, Even if it's once a week you release or once every 2 weeks, just obviously try to make sure that you release the same sort of time every week if you can. Initially, the creating part of it, I would say it's very important to get the right equipment. I've tried and tested numerous microphones throughout this time to try and get background sounds correct. I had to invest in a microphone in here because I just was just so panicked by the sounds I was hearing from the mic that I had before. Um, Recording software is very important as well. Everyone's got different softwares that they like. I know other people use recording software via particular apps, but I took a free trial out of Logic Pro for 90 days. 90 days, and then when it runs out, I just use it again. So I'll just recommend that for anyone who wants to use that. Um, yeah, and if you've got people and voices and actors you want to use, I recommend Fiverr. Fiverr is an application, obviously a lot of freelance voice actors on there as well. But try and be specific in terms of what you want when you ask, because I find Fiverr to again be a bit of a minefield. I had an example before where I asked for a particular actress for a particular voice, a particular dialect of voice, and I ended up getting 100 men come back to me asking me if they could do the voice, and it was so much to get through. So be specific in what it is that you need. And if you're under any doubts, I would just say just do it. And even if you give it to friends first, just to listen and give you some little feedback, or somebody that you know will be honest with you as well, that can also help. But yeah, don't be afraid, and just, I would say, stick at it. Yeah, I think that's it.
Those are great advice. Even if you don't do an audio drama, just for just creating a podcast, having those tools in place and knowing exactly, like specifically going to Fiverr and being very specific in what you want. Because, like you
Sure.
said, if you aren't specific, you can get 100 people that don't fit the
Yes.
bill, and you're like,
Yes.
this is not what I want.
Yeah, correct.
Um,
But also have patience as well. Obviously, there are going to be days where you're just not going to be in the mood to record. And I've had a few of those days when you're just tired. Even what I wanted to really do sometimes was record one day and edit the same day, but I'm so exhausted from recording that I just haven't got the time to edit. So I would say
yeah.
give yourself enough time to get the stuff that you need to get done. But don't overdo it, and don't push yourself too hard. If you need a break, take a break.
No, I fully embrace that, taking a break when you can, because if not, like normally I record 2 days a week. My Tuesdays and Wednesdays are the days I record,
Okay.
and I can go back to back for like 6 hours of just recording. And there's no way I'm editing after
Yeah.
6 hours
Yeah.
of recording, because it's just so much work. But luckily, the podcast kind of I've set it up so the editing is a bare minimum I have to do to
Fine.
make it. Doing an audio drama, forget it. That is, like you said, it takes a week. So your release schedule, is it a fort? I know British people like to use the fortnight or a bi-weekly podcast, or
Uh,
is it weekly?
Weekly, every Tuesday. Every Tuesday.
Every Tuesday.
So we just came back for season 3 yesterday. So that will probably be about a 10 episode season, this one. So about 10 weeks. And there'll be another break, and there'll be another start, and we'll start all over again. But yeah, every week, every Tuesday is the release date.
Awesome. Where are you going from here? Like, where do you see either the Icarus Complex or yourself, Linden, in the podcasting world? Where do you want to see? Like, if I snap the finger 5 years in the future, where are we? What is Linden doing?
Ideally, I'd want to bring this story to a visual form, whether it be animation or whether it be
Live
small
action?
series, yeah, live action, or on YouTube, or one of the stuffing like that. After that, I do want to tell more stories. I feel like there's a lot of stories out there, not necessarily from different backgrounds. There's a lot of stories that are untold, in my opinion. So it may not be a story that I necessarily write, maybe on behalf of somebody else, and just I'll try and bring that story to life. But I do feel like there are people out there with interesting stories that could easily be told in this medium, and I find this medium to be the easiest to put your point across. So that's
No,
my plan. That's my plan.
that's a great plan, and I'm already falling in love with the podcast. I can't wait to
Thank you.
listen
Thank you
to the
very
other
much.
one. I listened to the season 2 recap just now before we jumped on, but I've listened to pieces and parts of other episodes just to get an idea of it, and it's very smooth. The sound is so smooth.
Thank you. I do appreciate that. It's taken a bit of practice to do that. Honestly, if you can imagine how it started off, if anyone listens to it, obviously they can realize that it didn't start off. It sounds okay in my opinion, but I think the early ones, you can definitely tell that I wasn't as fully up together, yeah, as anyone is when they start
Yeah.
something new. So, but I do appreciate it. So thank you very much. Thank you.
You're welcome. And to that point, like I remember my first podcast. I've been podcasting for 6 years. I remember my first episode was the worst. The sound was horrible. The
Sure.
mics I was using, just like you said, you had to go through multiple mics. I went
Yeah.
through multiple mics, getting the right mixer and all that stuff and the equipment. But listening back, I'm so embarrassed by it. But also, I'm super proud because it's
Fine.
something I did. I did something
It's all
that
part
other
of the journey.
people.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's all part of the journey. Like there's approximately 3 million podcasts on Apple, and there's 7 billion people in the world. So it's like it's a fraction of the world is on it. So not a lot of people put out podcasts. So just having the guts to put something out there to be creative. How did you deal with that? Since you're a creative and
Sure.
you come from that, how did you deal with the kind of like anxiety of releasing it?
Well, one at the moment, obviously, I'm. I don't think there wasn't for me. I don't think there really was an anxiety. So because I've been in that circle before, where I've been able to, and because my face isn't really on it as such, it's not something that people may notice me necessarily from listening to my voice. But obviously, the average person isn't going to know who Linden Cole is off the bat. So I would say that that gave me the solace to know that there wasn't really a comeback as such. If anything, I don't know how to best explain that, to be honest with you.
If there was any negativity coming from it,
Yeah,
it
yeah,
wouldn't you wouldn't
correct,
have to worry because
correct,
it's only a
correct.
voice and it's not visual. So
And initially, obviously, I had no promo for it, so there was no one to, there was nowhere, there was nowhere for anyone to write any bad feedback anyway. Initially, but obviously now it's open field, but it's okay. Like I said, everyone's entitled to their opinion. I know it's not going to be for everybody. It deals with themes that sometimes are unheard of for men to discuss. It may have some uncomfortable conversations with other people about certain things, but I'm trying to make it true to life. I'm trying to obviously give the sensitive or emotional man that we all have within us a voice, and just to obviously let people know that we all do go through things. Some of us have the ability to be able to express ourselves in the way we need to, and others don't. And this is an example of that.
I love it. I love it because it is true. Like, have you had any of your fans reach out and say thank you for some of the conversations that you've had on the you created through the podcast?
Yeah, I had a gentleman reach out to me the other day, and I was quite taken aback by it because one of the actual things that happens to one of the characters happened to him as well. So, and I felt like he was from how he spoke to me about it. I don't think he. I felt like he felt he was the only person to go through something like that. So, to have someone else to relate to kind of gave him solace, in my opinion, or he told me it gave him solace to know that he wasn't alone in that particular situation. Which I was taken aback by because I said I did intend for it to hopefully be a platform to give others a means of being able to speak about their feelings, but I didn't expect to get the feedback from it, if you know what I mean.
You weren't expecting to actually have people reach out and say,
No,
"Hey,
I
I
didn't.
went
Yeah,
through that."
no, no, not at all.
So, do you feel with that you have some responsibility to make sure that you everything is up to snub, like a bit more pressure, because you know that there are audience members who may actually relate to a lot of the situations that occur?
Um, yes, yes and no. I mean, because I've already written it, and I know how it begins and ends. This character has to go through peaks and troughs in order to get where they need to get to. So, and that is how life is. So, as much as the pressure might be to maintain a certain level of service on this particular podcast, I'm trying to make it as true to life as possible. And obviously, I can't please everybody with this. But this is obviously in my head. This is my idea of a particular character, and I just hope that however it ends, people sympathize with the character. There are going to be moments where throughout it, you may find yourself shouting at the screen you're listening to, or find yourself unhappy with a particular person. But I'm hoping that everyone who listens to it understands that everything that was done was for a reason, and hopefully some sort of retribution comes from this at the end. So, yeah.
Excellent. No, I love it, and I'm looking forward to listening to more and hearing chapter season 3 create a new world. How many seasons are you planning for this?
I've got in my head about 7, but it could go as much as 9. It could go as much as 9, but I feel like 7 may be a good place to end on that one. So,
Lucky number 7. That's always a good number to, you know.
as I say,
Lyndon, I'm going to jump off the screen here. I'm going to give you the last bit of time because we are running out, unfortunately. Let my audience know where they can listen to the podcast, where they can connect with you, and so that they can enjoy this amazing conversation.
thank you for your time, Phil. Appreciate it. Hi everyone, name's Linden. So you can find Icarus Complex seasons 1 to 3 on the Apple Podcast, Spotify Podcast, Google Podcast, and Amazon Music, and all other podcast platforms. If you want to reach out to me or look at the Instagram page, we are on Icarus_complex on Instagram, and also on Twitter at Icarus__complex. And that's it. So thank you very much. Much appreciated.
It's my pleasure to have you, Lyndon. I was so thankful that your management reached out to get you on the podcast because I would never have heard this. And this is the problem with having 3 million podcasts
Yeah,
out there. It's really hard to find the ones that
sure,
you actually
sure.
connect with. And one of the reasons I kind of did this podcast was to connect with other fellow podcasters to learn about their show. So thank you for taking the time to jump
You're
on.
doing
I
a
know
great
it's
job as well, so thank you. I do appreciate this.
Oh, thank you. And to my audience, remember in the show notes will be all the links to listen to the Icarus Complex and connect with Lyndon. Again, I thank you, Lyndon, for being on the show. To my audience, remember, invest in yourself.